My husband stood in front of 300 guests at our son's graduation reception and called me the bookkeeper who married up. 291 people laughed. I set my water glass down on the white tablecloth, walked past him to the microphone he had just left, and opened the manila folder I had been carrying in my tote bag for 14 months. My name is Raven. I'm 41 years old. 2 weeks before that afternoon, our son Caleb had crossed a stage in a navy cap and gown at Ashford University, and for one clean, golden hour, everything had felt the way I'd always imagined it would. Then the reception began at the Lindwood Country Club in Hartford, the chandeliers throwing soft amber light over white linen, the smell of seared scallops and lilies drifting from the buffet, and Marcus, my husband of 19 years, picked up a champagne flute and asked for everyone's attention. He thanked our families. He thanked Caleb's professors. And then, with a grin he'd practiced in some mirror I never saw, he turned to me and said I'd spent 2 decades counting beans while he built an empire. What he didn't know, standing there in his charcoal suit with his watch catching the light, was that for 14 months I had been quietly building something of my own, something he wouldn't be able to laugh his way out of. But before I tell you what happened at that microphone, you need to come back with me to a kitchen in Providence, Rhode Island, 26 years ago, where a woman named Eleanor, my grandmother, handed me a tin recipe box that had nothing to do with recipes. Before I continue, if this story is starting to resonate with you, take a moment to subscribe, but only if you genuinely feel something. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let me take you back to where this really began. I grew up in a small house on Larch Street with a mother who worked double shifts at a textile plant and a father who left when I was 6. My grandmother Eleanor raised me in the gaps between my mother's hours, in a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and old paper, with a radiator that ticked all winter like a slow clock counting down to something. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything and said almost nothing. She kept that tin recipe box on the top shelf, and one rainy afternoon when I was 15, she pulled it down, opened it, and showed me that underneath the index cards for pot roast and apple cake, there was a folder of yellowed papers, bank statements, a deed, a single sealed envelope addressed to no one. A woman should always keep her own proof, she told me, tapping the folder with one finger. Not because you expect to need it, because the day you need it, it will already be too late to start collecting it. I didn't understand what she meant that day. Not for another 23 years. I became an accountant because numbers never lied to me the way people sometimes did. I liked the certainty of a ledger that balanced, the quiet satisfaction of finding the one transposed digit hiding in 400 rows. By the time I was 29, I was a senior auditor at a firm in Hartford, and that was where I met Marcus, tall, magnetic, 11 years into a real estate career that was just beginning to take off. He used to tell people I was the only person who ever made him feel like he had nothing to hide. I used to believe that was a compliment. We married on a Saturday in October when I was 31, in a small chapel that smelled of white lilies and candle wax, my grandmother sitting in the front row in a navy dress she'd had tailored for the occasion, watching me through the entire ceremony with an expression I didn't fully understand until years later. Not disapproval, exactly, but a kind of careful attention, as if she were filing something away for later use. Caleb was born 2 years after that, on a January morning with 7 inches of snow on the ground. And for a long time, our life looked exactly like what I thought I'd wanted. A colonial house on a quiet street in West Hartford, a minivan with a car seat, a husband whose business kept growing the way a fire grows when nobody's watching it closely enough. Marcus was generous in those early years, the kind of generous that photographs well, flowers for no reason, a surprise trip to Vermont for our 5th anniversary, a habit of introducing me to colleagues as the smartest person in this room. And I mean that. I believed him for a long time. I noticed things, though. I always noticed things. I noticed that the home equity line we'd opened for a kitchen renovation in 2019 carried withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing. I noticed that Marcus had started taking calls in the garage with the door shut, his voice dropping to a register I rarely heard inside the house. I noticed the new cologne, sharp and unfamiliar, and a gym membership that never seemed to produce a single drop of sweat on his collar when he got home. I noticed, the way my grandmother had taught me to notice, and I said nothing. I just started keeping my own folder. The betrayal that finally cracked everything open didn't happen all at once. It happened on a Tuesday in March, 18 months ago, at 11:42 in the evening, when I came downstairs for water and found Marcus's phone lit up on the kitchen island. A text thread open from a contact saved simply as V. The messages went back 14 months. There was a woman named Vanessa Cole, the 34-year-old daughter of Marcus's business partner, and there was a dollar figure in one message that made the floor tilt under me. $86,000. Wired from an account I had never heard of. Dated the same week Marcus had told me Caleb's tuition shortfall meant we needed to tighten things for a semester. I didn't say anything that night. I went back upstairs, lay down beside a man I'd shared a bed with for 16 years, and stared at the ceiling fan turning in slow, patient circles until the sky outside the window went from black to gray. I counted the seconds the way I used to count rows in a ledger. Somewhere around 4 a.m., I made a decision. I didn't cry that night. I made a different decision instead, the kind my grandmother had tried to warn me about 23 years earlier. The next morning, I drove to a storage facility 11 miles from our house and rented a unit under my maiden name. I opened a separate bank account at a credit union Marcus had never used, depositing $40 to keep it active. I started saving every bank statement, every email, every screenshot, the way someone learns a language, slowly, methodically, one word at a time, until one day they realize they're fluent. If you've ever been the only one in your family who noticed what nobody else wanted to see, type, "I noticed," in the comments below. I read every single one. What I found over the following months, working quietly in the evenings after Marcus had gone to bed, was not just an affair. It was a pattern. Marcus had been siphoning money out of 3 accounts: our joint checking, a home equity line, and, worst of all, the 529 college savings account we'd opened for Caleb when he was 4 years old. Between January of that year and the following spring, he had withdrawn $213,000 across 11 separate transfers, most of it routed through a Shell LLC registered to an address in Providence that, I later confirmed, belonged to Vanessa's brother. He had forged my signature on a refinancing document in April, notarized by a man who, it turned out, had also notarized 2 other documents for Marcus that year without ever actually meeting me. I sat in my car outside a law office on Asylum Avenue on a Thursday afternoon in June, rain streaking the windshield, the smell of wet asphalt drifting through the cracked window. And I called an attorney named Priya Anand, whose name I'd gotten from a former client. I remember the exact moment she looked up from the folder I'd handed her and said, very quietly, "This is one of the most thorough paper trails I've seen from someone who isn't already a forensic accountant." I told her I was. She smiled for the first time in that meeting. "Then you already know what we're going to do." What Marcus didn't know, all that summer and into the fall, was that every time he sat across from me at dinner and complained about tight cash flow, I already had the wire transfer dated and time-stamped. Every time he kissed my forehead before leaving for a site visit on a Saturday, I already had the credit card statement showing 2 dinners for 2 at a restaurant in Providence that didn't serve lunch. He escalated, the way people do when they believe they're invisible. He bought Vanessa a $4,200 watch in September and charged it to a business account I had access to, but he assumed I never checked. He told his mother, Constance, that I had let myself go and stopped being fun. Constance, who had never liked me much to begin with, began making little comments at every family dinner about how some women just aren't built for a life like ours. As autumn turned into winter, the cruelty grew bolder, the way it always does when people believe no one is keeping score. Constance began inviting Vanessa's name into conversations she had no business being part of, mentioning a sharp young woman in Marcus's office, at a Thanksgiving table 16 miles from my own kitchen, watching my face for a reaction I refused to give her. Marcus started leaving his laptop open on the kitchen counter, careless in a way that told me he no longer thought I was paying attention to anything beyond grocery lists and Caleb's college applications. He told a cousin at a New Year's party that I'd stopped trying years ago, loud enough for me to hear it from the next room, and I stood there with a glass of sparkling water sweating in my hand, thinking about the storage unit 11 miles away, with its rows of labeled folders, and I felt something close to pity for how little he understood about the woman he'd married. I sat through all of it with the same calm I'd learned at my grandmother's kitchen table, because I understood something they didn't. The silence did the work that words never could. I need to pause here for a second. If you can feel what I was feeling in that moment, that calm certainty you get when you finally stop hoping someone will change, type "I understand" in the comments. I promise you, you're not the only one who's been there. By February, I had everything Priya needed: bank records, the forged document, a sworn statement from the notary's assistant who confirmed the irregularities, photographs a friend had quietly taken outside a hotel on Route 44, and a recorded voicemail Marcus had accidentally left on our home phone, the old landline neither of us used anymore, where he could be heard telling Vanessa that, "Once Caleb graduates, it's done. I just need a few more months." I listened to that voicemail 11 times before I stopped feeling anything when I heard his voice. My friend Margot, who had known me since graduate school, was the only person I told everything to. She sat across from me in my kitchen one February evening, the radiator ticking the exact same way my grandmother's used to, and she asked me the question everyone eventually asks. "Why are you waiting?" I told her I wasn't waiting, I was building. "There's a difference," I said, "between hiding from a storm and learning exactly where it's going to make landfall." Graduation arrived on a Saturday morning in May, 81 degrees and clear, the kind of bright New England light that makes everything look like it's already a photograph of itself. Caleb crossed the stage at 11:17 a.m., and for that hour, I let myself feel only pride, clean and uncomplicated, the way pride is supposed to feel. The reception that afternoon at the Lindwood Country Club was the first time in 14 months that every person who mattered in this story would be standing in the same room. Constance was there in a blue silk dress, already telling a cousin that Marcus was finally about to start a whole new chapter. Vanessa was there too, seated 2 tables away, introduced to other guests as a family friend. I wore navy, the same color as Caleb's gown, and I carried the manila folder in my tote bag the way some women carry an extra cardigan, just in case. Marcus picked up his champagne flute at 2:50 in the afternoon. He thanked our families, thanked Caleb's professors, and then he turned toward me with that rehearsed grin, the one I'd seen in 23 years of dinner parties, and he made his joke about the bookkeeper who married up, about how I'd spent 2 decades behind a calculator while he built something real. 291 people laughed. Constance laughed loudest of all. The color drained from Caleb's face as he looked at me, not laughing, his jaw tightening the way mine does when I'm holding something back. I set my water glass down. I walked to the microphone Marcus had just stepped away from, and the room went quiet the way a room only goes quiet when it senses something it can't yet name. I thanked everyone for coming. I told them how proud I was of Caleb. And then I said, in the same calm voice I use when I'm explaining a discrepancy to a client, that I wanted to share something I'd been carrying for a while. Not to ruin a celebration, but because some doors don't close on their own. They have to be opened, looked at clearly, and sealed for good. I opened the folder. I read the date of the first unauthorized withdrawal, January 9th of the prior year, and the amount, $18,500, transferred to an LLC with an address 11 miles from this very building. I read the total. $213,000 moved out of our accounts over 14 months, including $31,000 taken directly from our son's college fund, the same semester Marcus told Caleb and me we needed to tighten things. I held up a copy of the forged refinancing document, My signature on it nothing like my actual signature. And I named the notary who had signed off on it without ever meeting me. Marcus's hands started to tremble around the stem of his glass. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood, and 2 tables of guests turned to watch her walk out before the room even understood why. I didn't raise my voice once. I told them that for years, my grandmother Eleanor had told me a woman should always keep her own proof, not because she expects to need it, but because the day she needs it, it's already too late to start collecting it. I understood what she meant now, fully, 23 years after she first said it in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon. Marcus tried to speak. Nothing came out except my name, twice, like he was testing whether saying it might undo the last 4 minutes. I didn't seek revenge that afternoon. The truth handled that part entirely on its own. Constance stepped back from the table as if I'd slapped her, her blue silk dress catching the light from the chandeliers as she sat down hard in a chair that wasn't hers. Caleb crossed the room and stood beside me, not saying anything, just standing there the way a person stands beside someone they've decided to believe. I closed the folder. I thanked everyone again for celebrating Caleb. Then I walked out of the Lindwood Country Club into 81 degrees of bright May sunlight, and for the first time in 14 months, I let myself breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. The consequences moved fast after that, the way water moves once a dam finally gives. Within 6 days, Marcus's business partner, Vanessa's own father, froze the joint development account after seeing the forged document Priya had filed alongside our separation paperwork. Within 3 weeks, the notary lost his license pending an investigation. Within 2 months, Marcus had moved out of a rented apartment near Vanessa's and into a 1-bedroom unit closer to his mother's, the empire he'd bragged about at that microphone quietly contracting around him. Constance called me in July. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. She apologized, not fully, not the way I would have wanted, but enough that I could hear something underneath it that sounded almost like shame. I told her I appreciated the call, and that I'd be glad to have a relationship with her again, on the condition that she never spoke about my marriage in front of Caleb that way again. She agreed. We're still working on it. I didn't celebrate, not really. There was no champagne flute waiting for me, no microphone moment of my own design. What there was, 3 weeks after the reception, was a Sunday morning in my new apartment in West Hartford, smaller, quieter, with morning light pouring gold across the kitchen table, the exact way it used to pour across my grandmother's. Caleb sitting across from me in a faded college t-shirt, laughing about something one of his professors had said at a farewell lunch, the smell of coffee and toast filling the small kitchen, the radiator in the corner ticking softly the same way Eleanor's used to. Margot came by on a Tuesday in August, 2 bottles of wine and a loaf of sourdough bread balanced in her arms, and we sat on the small balcony of my new apartment until the streetlights came on, not talking about Marcus at all, just laughing about graduate school and the terrible apartment we'd shared at 24 with a radiator that never worked. At one point she looked at me and said, "You know, I always wondered how you stayed so calm through all of it." I told her the truth, that I wasn't calm. I was just patient enough to let the truth do the shouting for me. What I learned, sitting in that kitchen, was something I couldn't have understood at 31, or even at 39. Patience isn't the absence of anger. It's anger that has decided to wait for proof instead of an audience. Evidence outlasts excuses every single time. And the calm I'd spent my whole life being underestimated for, the quiet, the watching, the noticing, wasn't a weakness anyone had ever talked me out of. It was the one thing none of them ever saw coming. If you've ever been told you were too quiet, too careful, too much of a bookkeeper and not enough of a dreamer, I want you to hear this clearly. Keep your own proof. Not because you expect to need it, but because the day you do, it will already be too late to start collecting it. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments, what's the one piece of proof you'd want in your own folder? If you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. And if you're new here, subscribe. Another story is waiting in the description. Thank you for being here all the way to the end. I'll see you very soon.